We're wondering if it was okay to record this as well. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so just to start off, I'd like to introduce myself and everyone here. So we are the Pleasanton Revolution, and that is basically a youth-led or student-led committee that works to reform our city and our county on a broader level on three main platforms, and that those platforms include police reform, police accountability, which has to do with data and statistics available to the public, and education reform as well, which has to do with changing the way that the narratives in our history curriculum are presented to us to make sure that people are more aware of race-conscious education. So those are the three main things that we are looking to do right now. And this also falls very much in line with the Black Lives Matter movement. We organized a car protest earlier last month, and we were able to kind of meet with our district and talk about our concerns with education as well. So now the goal of the team that I specifically am working on has to do with reforming police in the city of Pleasanton and making it so that citizens are able to hold their police officials more accountable, which is kind of how I ran into the platform that you have as well, because I noticed that that was very much your goal when running for district attorney and also as a civil rights attorney. So my name is Krishna Prakash. I graduated from Amador Valley High School in Pleasanton this past year. And if everyone else would like to introduce themselves.
I'll go next. Hi, my name is Satya. I'm also an Amador graduate class of 2020.
I go? Okay, I'll go. I'm Robin. I'm one grade above them. I also graduated from Amador about 1 year ago.
My name is Emma, and I'm also from Amador, class of 2020.
My name is Gloria, and I'm from Amador, class of 2020 as well.
My name's Rashab, and I'm also from Amador, class of 2020.
My name's Carolyn, and I'm also Amador Valley, class of 2020.
I'm Evan, same grade as Robin. I'm a year above, class of 2019, Amador Valley. Yeah, first year at college, rising second year.
Hi, I'm Sandra, and like Robin and Evan, I'm Amador Valley, class of 2019.
All right, is that everyone? I think so. All right. So I did mention a few things about Ms. Price, who so graciously agreed to join us today. She's a civil rights attorney based in Oakland. And Ms. Price, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do, that'd be great.
Sure, let me undo this. All right then, it's good to be with you all. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. And I'm gonna be moving a little bit. Okay, so this is, first let me say that yes, I am a civil rights lawyer. I've been blessed to be in the space of civil rights and advocating for police accountability for many, many years, and have had some successes and some setbacks. And for me, in 2018, I was recruited to run for district attorney for Alameda County, recognizing that the complete lack of police accountability is part of the tradition of this county, and that there was this county was crying out for police accountability, and we still are. As you can see in this season now, we're dealing with where folks are woke and aware of what is going on and what has transpired in terms of the relationships between police and community, as well as the activities of police in certain communities, and all of that is now being challenged in some very significant ways. So this is a great time to have this conversation, and I appreciate that you invited me to come and talk to you about that. and that we can be in conversation about it. And this is, again, it's inspiring because you all are the ones who are going to be the policymakers and who right now have the capacity. You're driving the conversation, and you can drive the policies that people respond to. And it's so important in this season that the response is not just lip service, is not just paper mache responses, but that it's thought out and that it's grounded in the experience of policing and how that has impacted not only communities, but what it really means to live in certainly for us in California, a place where people are over policed. And it goes from how we think about criminal justice, how we think about prisons, and the 4 Ps that I hope we can talk about today. And that's what I want to take as my theme, is that the criminal justice system and reforming the system is both dealing with police activity, police accountability. The key to that is prosecutors. And then there's also the issue of prisons and probation officers and how all of those together. And what's not a P, which you need to keep in mind, are judges. They start with a J, but they play a significant role in how all of this functions. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm definitely open to questions.
Thank you so much for explaining a little bit more about what you do and your background. So to that end, the first things that I would like to kind of talk about with our group here is how you got started in your field of civil rights and how that's kind of evolved into dealing with what we're seeing today, and what are your experiences as a lawyer or someone who works with and has seen these things firsthand?
Sure. I got started when I was 12 years old. I got radicalized with the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And I describe that as like a curtain tearing in half of my life. There was before Dr. King's assassination and there was after. And you have to understand, when you put Dr. King's assassination in the context, that young people, not only in the South, but in the North, across this country, were involved in the civil rights movement at that time. And so I was one of those who was very young, but was very aware that I could see my peers who were walking out of schools and organizing sit-ins and protests and being challenged with dogs and water hoses. All of that was being brought to us every night on the news. And as a young girl, I could see other young people who were my age and maybe a little bit older in junior high and high school who were literally putting their bodies on the line and in the streets, demonstrating for freedom. And that had a huge impact on me. And then when Dr. King was assassinated, that just, for me, was a tipping point, quite frankly. And so I became very involved in the civil rights movement. I was part of a whole generation of young people that were being educated around Black history and the history of America, the history of indigenous people in this country, and who were protesting and demonstrating. And on December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were 2 leaders of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, and they were assassinated while sleeping in their apartment by the Chicago police. And when that news hit, myself and other young people, again, began demonstrating. I personally participated in a sit-in at my school. I was in 7th, 8th grade, first semester, 8th grade, and I got put out of high school because they did not want us demonstrating and having a sit-in. And when they figured out that I was one of the organizers, I got put out. And it was the only college prep school in my city. And so I was put on a completely different path for my education and for my life from that point forward. I then got arrested in a demonstration, another one, in 1970. And I was incarcerated for a year. And during that time, people I knew were hunted by the police and killed. It was a very, very challenging, very dangerous time. And I just survived, literally by the grace of God. And I was surviving, trying to make it through high school. I was in the foster care system and the juvenile justice system at the same time, and it was not fun. And so at one point, I had dropped out of high school and then figured out how to apply to Yale, which was unheard of, and then got accepted to Yale, which was truly a miracle. And so in an instant, I went from being pretty much a high school dropout to then being able to go to Yale University. And so I never forgot what I had gone through and what people who I knew had died for civil rights, for my ability to have the opportunity even to go to a place like Yale. I would never forget that because that's what I went through. And so I went to Yale and then came to California to go to UC Berkeley Law School, graduated and started as a public defender in San Francisco with Bayview Hunters Point Community Defender's Office, which was a federally funded alternative to the public defender's office. I did that, and again, at that point, I had been involved in criminal justice issues while I was in law school. I served as the National Criminal Justice Coordinator for Black American Law Students Association, BALSA, and then continued that work with the National Conference of Black Lawyers, and then at Bayview Hunters Point Community Defender's Office. So in the course of that early experience of becoming a lawyer, I also had a bird's eye view to the role that police officers played in Black and Brown communities, over policing, the role of the district attorney in overcharging, and I saw the explosion of prisons in California. And we knew that as we began to build and to invest in prisons here, that if you build prisons, you have to fill them up. And that was the role of the police and the district attorneys. And that's why California is a leader in incarceration, because we built all of these prisons and we had to have a way, we budgeted for building prisons and investing in incarceration and not in education. And if you don't give people economic opportunity and educational opportunity, some people will engage in criminal activity. And even if they're not, some people, people will be subjected to the role of the police. And so the prisons were filled up, and we still see that. That's why it's very important as we look at now, how do we deal with police accountability, that we connect all the dots and that we have go through the full spectrum and look, not only you look at police, prosecutors, probation officers, and prisons. I learned early as a criminal defense lawyer, my clients, if they were charged with a crime, but they were on probation or parole, they did not have a right to a lawyer in a parole hearing to revoke their parole or to revoke their probation. And it was an easy way for the district attorney to short circuit any defense that I might have to a new charge. Most people don't know when you're on parole or probation, having any contact with a police officer is grounds for revocation of your parole or your probation. And so I would have clients who I knew were innocent. I believed they were innocent. I had a good defense to the charge that they were facing, but I didn't get an opportunity to present that defense because they were on parole or they were on probation. And literally the district attorney could walk into court and say, I'm dismissing the new charge. We're not going to have a trial. We're not going to determine whether or not this person actually committed the crime, but we are going to revoke his or her, I represented mainly men, we're going to revoke his parole because he had contact with a police officer. And it was very, very frustrating. For me, I would try to go to the parole board, but you don't have a right to counsel at the parole board. And so the parole board could care less what I said. And the person basically was reincarcerated. So that's how we created the revolving door in California. Yes, it starts with the police. It continues with the prosecutors. Prosecutors have tremendous influence over the judges. In Alameda County, most of our sitting judges are former prosecutors. They came from the DA's office. And often the separation between the judges and the district attorney, they don't recognize that. They don't consider that. They consider their role on the bench to be just a continuation of their role as the district attorney. And so you get judges and district attorneys that are committed to sending people to prisons. Why? Because we have prisons. Right now, California, after having been ordered by the federal court to reduce the numbers of people in prison, we have 137. Our norm is 137% capacity is how we house and keep people. So that's been my experience with certainly my learning curve with the criminal justice system. Questions?
So thank you so much for sharing that. I apologize for any noise. My neighbors chose right now to mow their lawns, but it's really inspiring to hear you say everything that you did. And just, I wanted to also say congratulations for getting through all the hardship that you did and accomplishing whatever, every single thing that you did, even through, as you said, going through so many different hurdles in your life. It's really moving, especially because a lot of us here on this call have been involved with civic education, and we have done a lot of research into some of these topics, but we don't know the extent to which they permeate society and the institutions that we base our stability on. And we kind of assume that things are just, as those are the principles in which everything is founded, but when the system itself is broken, I don't think that we realize how deep these issues are infested within society and even in the justice system. So it was very inspiring and I think very eye-opening to a lot of us just to hear everything that you've experienced. And I did want to ask some sort of follow-up to what you mentioned. So I heard several institutions and several type of jobs you mentioned. So would you say that institutions like prisons or the foster care system or even education for Black students have somehow gotten better in your time working, or are they worse because despite raised awareness for them? Would you say that things have reformed at all? Oh, you're muted.
I apologize. I'm trying to manage the phone and the computer. I didn't want the computer to make noise for you all. Hold on for a second. Oh, okay. All right. I have to say things are worse because early last year, I received an email from a gentleman in San Francisco. And he is a teacher, I believe, at Thurgood Marshall School in San Francisco. San Francisco has a long history of desegregation efforts and the fight for equal opportunity for Black and brown children in San Francisco. Decades long. While I was in law school, these cases were going on. After law school, I was aware of something called the Williams Consent Decree, a case that was litigated, again, out of San Francisco, but it applied statewide to conditions in schools where there's lead paint, or the bathrooms are falling down or non-functional. The physical plant was at the heart of the Williams case, and requiring school districts to meet just a basic minimum standard. I've been in some schools this year where I have seen that it troubles me that the bathrooms are horrible, or it's just not functional, or the water, it's not a good place for children. And it was not like that when I was in school. There was an investment in education that I saw coming up. I don't see that in California schools. And the pictures that the gentleman sent me last year of the food that was being served to children at Thurgood Marshall Elementary School was frightening to me, was devastating. I kept them. There was nothing that I could offer him or that I could do. And I know that that school is not unique. How we treat our kids in terms of the physical facilities that they are at, that we provide for their education in terms of the resources. I know teachers that, have to provide books and paper and pencils. My mom was a teacher for 35 years. My birth mom was a teacher. And when she would prepare for the academic year, she would make my sister and I go with her to set up her room. And she had pride and the ability to do that. That is so challenging for teachers now. Our educational system is basically falling apart, and because we have divested from education to incarceration. And it shows. It is reflected in the quality of the education that people receive and the quality of people's ability to engage in the new society. We know that society is changing. We know that there's a digital divide. We know that all of that is critical to our ability to move forward. And yet our educational system is not addressing that and is not responding to that. So I would say that we're doing worse. And if the overall as the country and certainly our communities are receiving less education, that means less opportunity. That means the school to prison pipeline gets filled up faster and is broader and deeper. It means less economic opportunity. It contributes to the racial wealth gap, which is just astronomical at this point. And I think that all of the challenges that you all are going to face are different and far greater than the challenges that my generation and the generations before us faced. I came up, my parents survived, my grandparents survived the Great Depression. We are at that level right now, and we're going to be there. So I would say it's worse than certainly my generation coming of age in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. This time is definitely going to be more financially challenging for our entire society across the board.
Yeah, that definitely does make a lot of sense. And that is something that I know that I've personally seen be circulated a lot around social media, especially with the narrative of defunding the police. And I just wanted to also add on that and possibly removing some money that goes to the police or police unions and instead putting that into education as a way to better invest in communities and just like any role that police should have in schools or how that should change going forward.
Right. So certainly defunding the police is a critical opportunity in this season. Just to be able to say that out loud. 2 years ago, you couldn't say that. When we ran for district attorney in 2018, if I had said defund the police, they would have said, oh, she's really crazy. I said we have to stop prosecuting, making our misdemeanors our main way of dealing with our issues. And they said, oh, she's terrible. Who could think that? Well, the conversation certainly has shifted and in a positive way. because we cannot, the way that we have been doing it for the last 40 years is we have been trying to over incarcerate people in response to every issue, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's the main issue, drugs and drug possession and alcoholism and mental health issues. We've just put everything, let's just put everybody in prison. Let's just make everything homelessness. This is a crime. Everything has become a crime for which incarceration is the solution. And so when you talk about defund the police, it is part of the movement to recognize that we cannot lock up our problems and lock our way out of our problems. So we need mental health. We've long needed an investment in mental health services, in housing, in alternatives to involvement and incarceration and involvement in the criminal justice system. Restorative justice has to be at the heart of the criminal justice system. And to fund those types of programs and initiatives, yes, you cannot continue to overinvest in policing and police services. Police officers do not want to deal with people who are in mental health crisis. And yet that's what we ask them to do every day. And we ask them to do it based on a model that is not even appropriate for someone who's having a mental health crisis. And then we wonder why the situation escalates and why people end up dead. It is so obvious where the answers lie. We just have to have the political will to get there. And that is where young people have the ability, because you all form the majority of the electorate, and you all are coming to the table with new ideas and with a different vision and an imperative, because the climate crisis is not waiting on us to figure all of this out. Okay, we have that going on, overshadowing everything. And so as you all are able, you're engaging, you have to be engaged now with an urgency that we have not seen in the last 40 years.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And as you were speaking about like the disproportionate issues that people of color are being targeted for, and how people are criminalizing many of the struggles that people of color go through, it really sounds like we're trying to criminalize the experience of being a person of color in this country and incarcerate them by trapping them in a technicality of law to make it seem like they're the ones at fault for being part of a system that was designed to work against them in the first place. And I think that's why we call ourselves revolution, not in any sort of anarchist way to bring down or harm government, but rather to work outside of a broken system instead of trying to reform it from within and being confined to how the system is already set up. So we have a few questions written down just about like the intent of this group. And I did want to ask if there's any specific policy or person that we should contact in order to try to gain more momentum and cause real change.
Yeah. Well, I think that you do have to follow, you realize you have tremendous power. One thing I like about public officials, as a civil rights lawyer, when I'm suing the county or the city, at the end, I've often said, well, okay, they do not understand that they are public officials and that this is public business. So when I'm representing someone and we have we're litigating it, it's not uncommon for me to say we're going to deal with the public business, because they have to be accessible. Public officials have to do the public's business in public, which means they have to be accessible to the public. So you have the ability to influence policy if you make your voice and your presence known to public officials. School board officials, they're elected officials. They want to be reelected. They want people to think that they're doing the right thing. If you are organized and consistent in your outreach to them, they'll start to pay attention. They'll be concerned, because their concern is that if they ignore you, you may be able to tell other people, and you might tell more people, and they don't know how far your influence actually goes. I find that with public officials, whether it's school board, they're particularly, I think, susceptible to influence by young people, city council people. You know, everybody pays lip service to youth leadership, and we want to support young people, and we want to do well for young people, but you have to hold them really accountable. You have to make them move beyond the lip service and say, okay, here's your opportunity, and what are you really prepared to do? And particularly now, what we're seeing in the wake of the George Floyd murder is that a lot of politicians are appropriating Black Lives Matter and saying, oh yes, I believe this and I'm for this, but where is your policy? And what are your actions demonstrating? And as elected officials, they always need to be held accountable to the people that they represent. And any organized group, this is the challenge that we face in dealing with corporate entities and lobbies and unions, is that they are organized and they have money, they have a budget that they can use to influence our elected officials, or to organize in ways that influence the elected officials. When you're a grassroots organization and you're trying to raise money, donations, and you don't have paid organizers, you're not at a disadvantage, because you can still organize. The gift of organizing is that it's just engaging like we are now with each other and with somebody else, and coming together. And you don't necessarily have to have paid staff to have the influence and the ability to reach out to your elected officials and say, this is our plan. This is what we would like to see in terms of policy changes, and how we want you to reinvent public safety. This is what we need you to provide for us, your constituents. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that definitely does make a lot of sense. And yeah, as you were speaking, I was reminded of some of the research that different people in our group have been doing over the last few weeks. And some of it did have to do with police training manuals and the types of data that are available for the public to see. And we were just wondering, is that something that has to be sort of asked for by a governmental entity? Is that something that city officials have to do? Or can we as members of the general public sort of demand that change from police unions and be taken seriously?
You can demand it, and you can insist that they take you seriously. I see we're switching. Hold, please. There you are. Okay, all right, how do I do this? Amber, help. Oh. Okay, she's gonna help me. Sorry. You can ask for the information. You have the right to have it. You may have to do a what's called a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act. But if it's the union, so it depends on the entity. The union has no obligation to give you anything. They are not a public agency. They are a privately organized association. To the extent that the union engages with the city, they sometimes provide information to the city administrator's office or your city manager. So that's another place that you could look to see what information is being provided. Because you're an organized group, a community-based organized group, you can speak on behalf of the group and say, we want this information. and they may tell you no. But then you can move to your elected officials. You can ask someone on your city council to make that request. I would urge you to be in coalition as much as you can with other organizations that share your values, if there are such. And get them to make the same request. And so you begin to build the momentum from the coalitions. Yes.
Definitely. So it sounds a lot like civic engagement and trying to essentially assert ourselves as individuals, which I think is really important in any citizen-led movement. So it definitely seems like what we're doing is similar to what a lot of other people have been trying to do in this country for a very long time. And I did want to ask another question that has to do just with the impact that we have felt as a city. And it's true that we're not immune to systematic racism and police brutality. Within the Bay Area, in Fremont, Oakland, San Francisco, there have been many different instances of police acting in exceedingly brutal ways. However, to my knowledge, we haven't had a case like that in our city, especially not recent enough for people to really take the issue of not only Black Lives Matter, but police brutality as a whole very seriously. And we were just wondering, how do we impress upon people the importance of empathy and of taking something of this weight as seriously as it should be?
So how many of you know of the case Jessica St. Clair?
Was that the 16-year-old that was killed in Fremont? Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. She came from the jail, right? Jessica Rita. I gotta find the Santa Rita. Yeah, Jessica St. Louis. I apologize. She died at the BART. She came from the Santa Rita jail. Santa Rita jail is very much part of your community, right? And so people often don't realize when you have a facility like that in the middle of your community. And I've been to, for instance, in Amador County, there's a lovely little city called Jackson, California. Well, Mule Creek State Prison is right outside of Jackson, California. And there are many people, and I will say that, many people who worked, what my experience in Jackson was that most of the people who ended up on my jury were actually connected to the prison. And so even though you all may not realize it, there are people in your community who are very connected to that jail. And that jail has an impact on the fabric of your community. And so as you start to think about how do we talk about police accountability and its impact on our community, you could start with the jail. Santa Rita Jail is considered one of the worst prisons, local jail facilities in the entire country. Okay. And we have a Republican sheriff who needs to be replaced because purportedly, Alameda County is supposed to be a Democratic county, right? A Democratic Party-led county. And yet we have a Republican who is in charge of the largest facility, the largest penal facility, and has the largest public safety budget in Alameda County. And it's right there in the heart of your community. And so I think that you can draw attention to, and the way that you connect the dots with the rest of what's happening in Alameda County is look at what's happening in the jail, and talk to people in the community. Well, what do you think about how many people have died in Santa Rita County Jail? And the fact that there's no accountability, that we don't have any, there have been a few officers prosecuted, and those have been horrendous cases out of Santa Rita County Jail. And so I would think that you could have that conversation with people who are in that proximity. And if you have not read Just Mercy, you should read Just Mercy. One of the things I love about what Brian Stevenson says is that proximity is everything. That when people are talking about organizing and what matters in their lives and how you represent people, you have to be proximate with them. And so you all are proximate to Santa Rita County Jail, okay, which gives you a huge organizing opportunity around criminal justice reform and police accountability. You don't have to talk about the Oakland police. You can talk about what's happening, who's holding the officers inside Santa Rita accountable. And how is that lack of accountability undermining our safety, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. I'm reminded of some of the reading that I did into not only our current district attorney, but also about the Santa Rita County Jail and I believe it was the Oakland Police Department that was basically found to be guilty of exploiting an underage girl. And there was an internal affairs report that incriminated and implicated over a dozen police officers, and none of them actually faced criminal charges. So it's really a shame to see that our higher officials, our DA, took notice that this was happening and then opted to do nothing because there not being enough evidence to indict people. However, the internal affairs department within the Oakland PD was able to publish a 252-page report. So clearly there was something else there. And to your point about the Santa Rita County Jail, there was a case, I believe, that was decided just last month in which an inmate, a 20-year-old inmate, was found hanging inside of his jail cell. And our DA was surprised at the police negligence and then still chose to not move forward with any further investigation. So even in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the second wave of Black Lives Matter, it seems that while people are taking notice, that notice doesn't manifest into any meaningful action. So we're still kind of stuck here in the same boat because of the inability to sort of act in a decisive manner. And sort of to turn this into a question, and there's only going to be like another question after this one, but we were wondering, because you are running for the DA again in 2022, is that true?
You all are asking some hard questions now.
But we were just wondering if you were
yeah.
Okay. But is there anything that we can do to sort of bring attention to the current DA and try to help your platform at all if you were interested?
I think so, for sure, because we all have an obligation to make noise and to do our due diligence and to hold our elected officials accountable. Just last night, I'm on the Alameda County Democratic Party Central Committee, and last night we passed a resolution requiring any elected official coming to us for endorsement from now on to acknowledge whether or not they have received political contributions from a law enforcement agency, to contribute that contribution to a community-based organization working on criminal justice reform or reentry services or racial justice, indigenous justice, justice issues in Alameda County, and to make a pledge that if they've received that donation, to turn it over to one of these community-based organizations, and to make a pledge that they will not accept such contributions in the future. And I'll be publishing a list of elected officials throughout Alameda County that have received such contributions. So I'm happy to share that list with you, and you can then approach them and say, okay, We understand that you've received this money, but we expect that the Democratic Party has spoken, and how long is it going to take you to comply with this directive, and hold them accountable at that level. As I spoke with one of my colleagues on the committee, she pointed out, she said, I think that this was a tipping point for us last night. And she said, we got to the tipping point because we made all the noise before we got there. And that's what you have to do. You have to push the envelope. You have to make the noise and shine a light on what is really happening. I mean, 2 years ago, we know that Sheriff Ahern gave Nancy O'Malley $10,000 for her campaign, and he put $50,000 into a law enforcement PAC. We know that the Fremont Police Officers Association gave her $10,000. And we raised that issue in 2018, but no one thought to do anything about it. There was no accountability. There was no, pushback against that. We thought it was outrageous, but it happened, and it was allowed to happen. Here we are now in 2020, because we kept talking about that. We reached a tipping point last night. So now it's not just that the law enforcement associations, the sheriff, the deputy sheriff, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, they are no longer going to be able to give those contributions in secret. And it doesn't just apply to district attorney, it applies to every elected official in this county. And so that's huge as we move forward. But we've made these positions. What I need you all to do is to help us make it real, because so many people will pay lip service and say, oh yes, I believe. But yeah, what are you doing to reallocate police dollars to mental health services or to housing services, to making sure, or to youth programs? This is where the money needs to go, and we need to force them to actually, don't put your money where your mouth is. Don't just say, I believe this, and then you're still going along the same path that you've been on for the last 10 years. I anticipate that next year our current district attorney will step down, and she will attempt to nominate her successor, because that is the way that district attorneys have transferred the office for the last 55 years, now 57 years. When I ran in 2018, we had not had a contested district attorney election in Alameda County since 1963. And the way that they did it was that before the person's term was up, that person would step down. They were all men. So the men would step down, and then they would appoint their successor. And then the Board of Supervisors would vote and say, yes, that's what I want to have happen. And then that person would hold it for 20 years, and then he would give it to his successor. Nancy O'Malley has been there for 20 years, and she plans to hand it to her successor. And so there will be a fight that I hope you all will join in probably January of 2021 to have the Board of Supervisors open up the selection process for the next district attorney of this county. And that means meeting with your supervisor on the book, because there's 5 supervisors, there's 5 votes, and every person's vote is important. And so that means going to that person, scheduling time to meet with that person, and letting him know that you all want to see some change in the criminal justice system in Alameda County, that you're not willing to accept the same old, and that it has to be real change. It can't just be lip service or pretty words on a piece of paper. It has to be a real commitment to opening up and revolutionizing the criminal justice system.
Yeah, that definitely does sound like the next goal that our council or team will have in mind.
Yes.
And as you mentioned earlier, with the list of elected officials, that would be great if you could email that to me. Yes. I would really, really appreciate that. Yes. We'll make that a priority, definitely. And for our final question, comes from one of our other team members, and she wanted to ask if, beyond the scope of police reform, if there's anything that we should focus on for community organizing or general reform, or anything that we should focus on to make better.
Sure. I mean, I think that the challenge that our country faces overall is the economic challenges. And you all are going to be, unfortunately, the beneficiaries of the damage caused by COVID-19. The inequalities, the wealth gap is tremendous in this country, and it has not been addressed. COVID-19 represents an opportunity to address that and to keep that at the forefront of the conversation. That as we begin to, so we haven't hit bottom yet. Okay, we're still going to the bottom on this COVID thing, and it's going to ravage not only, our health systems, but our economy. And so at some point when we hit bottom and we start to rebuild the country and rebuild the economy, that you all are there saying, how do we address the wealth gap and ensure that we have to address it, because we have to have public investment in education, in our healthcare system. We have to redo all the models. We cannot go with how it's been done. We can't try to go with what was before. You all have to re-envision not only public safety, but we've got to deal with the climate crisis. You've got to deal with how do we deal with public governance, okay? And as I like to say, we need leaders that are more in love with justice than money, okay? And that's what we're looking for, and that's what you all have to be looking for and saying, these are the leaders that we need. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. And I know that I've said that after every time that you've spoken, but it really does just resonate with a lot of the ideas that we've had, and just, I think, our general intent and motivation. But yeah, I think that was our last question. And I wanted to say again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for meeting with us. It's been such an honor, and it was such an enlightening experience as well. I'm sure that we all have a better understanding now of the extent of the issues that we have to tackle as a community and as members of not only a county, but of this country and of a functioning society. We have this innate obligation to fix what we can see is broken. So thank you for opening our eyes and speaking so candidly about your experiences. It was truly such a pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm honored to share with you guys. You all are the future. And I know for me, when I was a young person figuring out, well, who do I want to be? What am I going to want to? It was good to know that there were people out there who were fighting for justice. They had such an impact on me. So yeah, I'm fighting, and I need y'all to be fighting too. So we will stay in touch. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen and allowing me to come and talk. So
definitely, yeah.
Okay.
I'll let you know any changes or things that we make. I'll send them to you.
Let me know. Yeah, let me know what you're doing. It will inspire me. I'll wake up in the morning. All right, they're doing it down there. Let me get up. I got to get busy.
Definitely. And likewise, if there's anything that you want our help with, if we can help you at all, we are more than happy to do that. So please.
Thank you so much. All right, you guys, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well and survive the pandemic, okay? Stay safe.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Holy shit, dude.
Oh my God.
A round of
Krishna.
applause for
Well
Krishna.
done. I'll get you
Woo!
or something, bro. You did
Moderating.
good job. You should be a
Oh my
podcast host.
Sweating. Oh my God.
Well done.
You should have turned on your fan.
Thank you guys. I didn't want to have it like spinning in the back.
Ah, I got you.
Oh my God. Okay.
Good job.
All right. I have like
Badass.
5 pages of notes that I was taking.
Ooh. I just took 3 Post-it notes. I feel bad now.
No, it's all good. I took some notes too. So
Yeah, we have like 3 different scribes, like
yeah, so it's all
note
good.
taking for us.
I'm glad. Okay.
And we have a recording, so